Good morning, everybody. We're live here from the birdhouse, and today we're giving you an update about the different birds people are seeing in their backyards, as well as giving you an update about Orioles. We're always getting lots of questions about Orioles. As always, we love to know what kind of things you're seeing. If you've got any reports, absolutely throw those in the comments. If you have any questions, you can put those in there too. And or you can just say hello. So we will get started here. Um, Orioles. So Orioles are definitely still around in the area, and they will be around through the end of the summer. They usually start to fizzle out around the end of August or early September. They start to migrate back down south, but right now they are not only here, but their babies are starting to leave the nest. So you might start to see some birds that look like Orioles but are a little off coming to your feeders, and those are going to be the juvenile Orioles. And I've got some pictures here that Chris has sent in the past of the juveniles to kind of give you an idea of what they look like. They're not going to be bright orange like the males are yet. They're going to look more like the females, kind of a yellowish type of color. But they are out. This is a juvenile here that is just leaving its nest. It's kind of perched above it. If you look at the bird up top here on the branch, just below it is the nest right there, that hanging nest that the adults will make. So they're starting to explore and leave the nest. This is a baby here on a branch, just kind of getting its first steps, its first glimpse out into the big world here. So you can see they're still not fully feathered. They don't have the full tail feathers yet. Their beaks look huge, but they are definitely starting to leave the nest. So you might start to see the parents bringing them to the feeders, coaxing them to the feeders, and even feeding the adults, feeding the juveniles at the feeders. It's very typical this time of the year. They'll feed them the jelly, they'll feed them the mealworms. So having one or both, a combination of those, is your best bet to get those Orioles back into your yard if they've been kind of gone for a couple weeks. And this is a typical behavior here, showing the adult feeding the juvenile. So you can see there's the adult up top, and they're feeding the juvenile something, whether it be insects or jelly. This is a typical behavior you can see not only with Orioles, but other birds too, like chickadees, sparrows, cardinals. You might see this in your backyard right now. And then here's another picture of this. I love this picture here. It shows it really, really well. The adult male here feeding the juvenile Oriole. So Baltimore Orioles definitely still around. People haven't had much luck at all, though, with the hummingbirds. We haven't had a lot of reports of people with a lot of hummingbirds in any kind of numbers, and that's kind of how it's been the last few years. The hummingbirds seem to be kind of sparse, but people have been having lots of luck with Orioles. And here's a really great photo here of the Oriole. You can see it's still growing into its feathers. So some juvenile Oriole activity you can definitely expect this time of the year as they are starting to fledge and go out into the world. And you might see other things at your Oriole feeders as well. In general, the squirrels tend to leave the Oriole feeders alone, just like they tend to leave the hummingbird feeders alone, but that's not always the case. Like this photo sent in by Tammy shows. She says, did you know squirrels like bird jelly? So you might get more than the Orioles coming to your Oriole feeders. Those squirrels, we hear all kinds of squirrel stories all the time. And in general, like I said, the squirrels tend not to bother the Oriole feeders, but you never know. You can sometimes get that rogue squirrel that might pop in and get itself a little treat of jelly. Other birds you can sometimes see at your Oriole feeders too are going to be mockingbirds, like the northern mockingbird. This is a photo that had been sent in the past from Matthew, who was lucky enough to catch a glimpse of a mockingbird nest. So you can see they build a nest with a lot of sticks. Really, really cool. Let's see if this video works here. You can see those bright white patches on the wings of the mockingbird that they are known for. Really cool video there, sent in by Matthew of the mockingbird. And then also in that same family of mockingbirds, of the mimicking birds, are going to be gray catbirds. You can find them at your Oriole feeders quite often. They're probably the second most common bird you'll see coming to your Oriole feeder will be the gray catbird. And then also in that family are a bird called the brown thrasher. This is another mimicking bird, quite large, not super common in backyards, but sometimes people get them underneath their feeders as they're cleaning up seeds underneath the feeders, especially early on in the spring, but they're around all summer too. So other birds that are around all summer long are going to be owls in the woods, especially if you have any kind of woods or trees around you. Keep your ears open at night for the hooting of barred owls, great horned owls, and screech owls. They will sometimes hoot all summer long. So if you're outside enjoying the outdoors this summer, keep your ears open for the owls too. Other nocturnal birds you might catch a glimpse of at dusk flying around, or you might even hear them, are going to be the nightjar type birds like the eastern whippoorwill and also common nighthawk. So there are some other nocturnal birds besides owls that we do have in the area. Not super, super common. You're more likely to hear a screech owl or hear a barred owl, but we do have nighthawks and whippoorwills around also. Other nesting behavior people are seeing, chickadees. Chickadees are, if they're young, haven't fledged yet, the adults are still actively feeding the young inside the houses. Same with bluebirds. We're getting reports of bluebirds on their second brood, and those young are growing pretty steadily, and they should be out in the world within a week or so. This is a neat video here sent in by Vicky. It says chickadees working nonstop to feed the babies, coming and going constantly with their bills full of insects. So we've talked about this many times, but if you're trying to get more birds in your backyard this time of the year, as there's a whole bunch of natural food out there for them anyway, but one thing you can put out to supplement all of that are going to be mealworms. These birds will grab tons of mealworms because they need to feed their young all that insect protein in order for them to grow quick. Because in general, those birds are only, once they've hatched, they're only in that nest for a couple weeks before they're out into the world, and they take a lot of insect protein in order to do that. It is also the height of some bug season, lightning bugs. We are in the height of lightning bug time, and if you are going to be outdoors for the 4th of July, keep your eyes out for lightning bugs. There's a whole bunch of them around. They do have bioluminescence in their abdomen, which is really cool. They will flicker their lights at night, and this is what they look like during the day. You can find them in your gardens during the day. Pretty easy to see. They're mostly black with bright yellow, bright red markings on them, but really cool bugs to look out for. And this is what their larva looks like, and their larva also glows, which is really cool. So if you see something glowing in your grass at night, it's most likely going to be the larva of a lightning bug. And just like other insects, they go through that whole metamorphosis of egg to larva to pupa to adult. And I've seen a couple of these flying around in my backyard. I've got some grapevine that just kind of grows on its own. And every year it seems like with the grapevine comes the grapevine beetles. These are large scarab beetles. They look like this. But I've been seeing these flying around my bushes and trees around the bushes that have some grapevine growing up. So I tend to cut a bunch of it back, but I leave a little bit of it because I always think that these beetles are pretty cool. So these are a couple photos from my backyard of the grapevine beetle that I saw flying around the other night. So really fun. And then if you're seeing this in your garden, you've got yourself some leafcutter bees. Leafcutter bees will sometimes use mason bee houses as well. So if your mason bee house doesn't have mud capped off on it, but it has little leaves sticking out, it's absolutely from leafcutter bees. They will sometimes use those tunnels of mason bee houses And this is what they do to plants. They will just chew around the edge of the plant and cut it, make a little cut. And we definitely have them around. And this is what they look like. This is an example of a leaf cutter bee. So we do have those in the area as well. And here's one doing its thing, just kind of chomping away at the leaf. So keep an eye out in your garden if you see stuff like this. You've got yourself some leaf cutter bees. And something else to look out for, there's, of course, the different types of butterflies and moths. We've talked about a lot of the different types of butterflies you can find in your yard, but there's also moths. And not only are there beautiful giant silk moths, which I'll show you some pictures of, there's also some others like the gypsy moth, also known as the spongy moth, caterpillar. This is considered a pest. So if you have them around, probably want to get rid of them. They can really, really defoliate lots and lots of trees, but we're not having a big year for them. They tend to go, their populations have big booms and busts. And a couple of years ago, we had a really big population of gypsy moth caterpillars that were kind of wreaking havoc in the Finger Lakes area of New York. And this year, not so much, not at least yet. There haven't been a lot of reports of them yet, but they are around. And this is what the adult moth looks like. Really super similar looking to the gypsy moth or spongy moth caterpillar is going to be the tent caterpillar, which looks like this. And I've seen a lot of them around this year. They are the caterpillars that will form those big webbed tents in trees. And so in that tent, there can be hundreds of these tent caterpillars, and they also will defoliate. They are native. They're a great source of food for birds. We've talked about how all birds need all that insect protein in order to raise their young. Birds, especially like cuckoos, love tent caterpillars. They love those spongy moth caterpillars. So not a terrible thing to have in your backyard, but it seems like to be a pretty good year for them. And with all those caterpillars, you might get some birds feasting on those on those sites where you've got a whole bunch of them. Something to be on the lookout for in your garden if you're doing butterfly gardening or butterfly hummingbird gardening, and you've got some plants, nectar producing plants that attract butterflies. Check out this hummingbird clearwing moth. They are often mistaken for hummingbirds because they're about the same size. They hover like a hummingbird, and they like the same plants. So if you see something that looks like a hummingbird in your garden, but it looks a little bit off and it makes you do a double take, it could very well be the hummingbird clearwing moth visiting your garden. They seem to really love bee balm. That's what I tend to see them on the bee balm all the time. So I'm curious if anybody has seen any of those yet. We haven't had any reports of monarch butterflies either yet, but it's any day now that they'll be around. I'm sure there's been some seen. We just haven't had any reports of them yet. But I know the milkweed in my backyard is in bloom. So as soon as that milkweed comes in bloom, that's when we start to see those monarch butterflies migrating in. Another type of moth that you can find during the day is this day-flying moth called the Virginia centucha. And they're very dark in color, but they've got this beautiful iridescent blue back and a bright orange head. Really cool looking insect that you can find your nectar producing plants during the day. This is one of those day flying moths, same as the hummingbird clearwing moth. They are both active during the day. Most moths that we have are active at night, but not these two. And then this is a picture that was sent in a couple years ago by Ed of a Luna moth. So it's about giant silk moth time. And this is one that you can find around here. And they're just a gorgeous insect. If you have your porch lights on at night, take a look after a couple hours, of having your lights on and see if you've got any of these hanging around. They are definitely around. Really beautiful. Other things to look out for as far as the giant silk moths go, things like the Cecropia moth. They are seen around here, just not super common. What you're most likely to see is something like this, the Polyphemus moth. They're also quite large, and they are attracted to lights at night. And they're not alive for a very long time. They emerge, they mate, and they die. So they're not around for long at all. But right now is about the time that you can start seeing them. So keep an eye out. Really, really cool different things out there. And also at night, there's the frogs that will be singing. We have different species of frogs and that are out in the summertime. We've got the gray tree frog. They are usually gray in color. Sometimes they can be green. And they will also, a lot of these frogs and toads might come to your porch lights at night, especially gray tree frogs and American toads. They're attracted to the insects that the lights bring, and they can get themselves a nice little snack pretty easily when with all those bugs concentrated in one spot. So you might see a whole little food web happening at lights at night if you've got them going. We've got green frogs in the area. There are bullfrogs, which can get quite large. And then there's the American toad, which is really the most common thing you'll find, especially in your backyard. That's everything I have prepared for you guys. It looks like there's a few of you on with comments and questions. And absolutely, if you are out over the 4th of July holiday, make sure to bring your camera and snap some photos of whatever you might find and send them on in to us. We'll share your sightings. Tree Climber says, good morning, Liz. I'm putting cut oranges out my feeder. No sightings yet. It's very visible. So with Orioles, it's tough. It can be tough, especially if you're just starting to try to attract them this time of the year. They love oranges, especially it seems like early in the season, they come to the oranges and the nectar and the jelly. But as we go on into the season, it seems like they prefer the jelly more than anything. And sometimes they kind of ignore those oranges and nectar as we get on in the season, and they're eating more of the jelly and the insects like the mealworms like we talked about. But that being said, they are around and they will be around for a couple more months. So you still have time to attract them. Mushroom Kingdom says, I live in Illinois and I've seen a gray catbird. Must be rare. Only ever seen it once. So yeah, depending on where you live and what kind of habitat you have, they could be rare for your area. They could be common. It just all depends, but they are really, really cool. And make sure to listen for them because they will mimic the calls of other birds. And then at the end of their call, they have that sound that sounds like a meow, which is how they got their name. Ed is on, who had the picture of the Luna moth that I shared. He says, our Orioles haven't come back to the jelly yet, but we were lucky enough to have 2 or 3 hummingbirds show up mid-May. They've been pretty consistent at the feeders so far. Sad to report, we haven't seen any giant silk moths so far this year, and their season is starting to run out. Yes, so keep an eye out for those giant silk moths. I haven't seen any yet, but I'm hoping this weekend or next weekend, maybe I'm lucky enough to see some. Lynn is on, says, good morning. My Orioles are still going strong, and yay, a few hummingbird sightings at my bee balm and nectar. Awesome. Love to hear that. Ed says, I believe I saw a couple monarchs in Mendenponds Park just last week. Not a positive ID because they were both flying at a distance, but pretty sure they were monarchs. All right. So we've got some possible monarch butterfly sightings, which is a sure sign that it is summer. Virginia is on and says toads can end up in window wells. Bugs are attracted to lights from the basement, and the toads jump in and get stuck. I put a board in mine so the toads can climb back out. Good to check the window wells from time to time. Very good tip. Thank you. Yes, be careful of that. You don't want them to get stuck. And Tree Climber says it's their first time for me putting out oranges. So good luck with that, and hopefully you'll get your Orioles. Hopefully you'll see some come in and take a bite of those. If you happen to have some jelly, couldn't hurt to put out some grape jelly. They absolutely love that. But who can say no to a nice orange if you've got the Orioles around? Hopefully they'll come to that. It looks like that's everybody's comments and questions for the day. We will be back on Tuesday with another live stream. And until then, have a wonderful weekend, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.